Thank you for being here. And we have, last couple of days have been wonderfully enriched with narratives around the future of hospitality. And I always attend these sessions by first asking, what is the definition of hospitality? Hospitality, for me, is the front line of cultural diplomacy for a nation. How hospitable you are as a country positions you on the world stage, it impacts your GDP. And we live in a region which has got a number of dogmatic views about whether there is heritage and culture here. When you look at conversations on the last 25 years of me working in the hospitality industry, I've always defended the cultural hospitality or the heritage hospitality components that are deeply rooted in the Arabian world. So today I'm really glad that we are able to have a conversation not just about the future, but actually the heritage and cultural landscape of this very rich region. And today I'd like to invite Imran Changezi from Diriyah Development to come on the panelists, one of our panelists. We have a rich number of individuals with great experience. Imran Changezi from Diriyah Gate Development Authority. We have Hicham Hassouni from Boutique Group. And we also have Mark Powell Kyffin, if I can say his name correctly. He's the architectural section head at the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism. And last but not least is Peck, who's the chairman of OBMI. Please, gentlemen, have a seat. The conversation that we're going to have today is mostly about understanding the importance of heritage and culture, and heritage and culture in the context of hospitality. And it's fascinating to see what and how you define heritage in many ways. A lot of people intuitively will lean into heritage being a physical asset, or it'll talk about palaces, all of those components where we also know we have certain hallmarks and landmarks of rich cultural heritage, storied places. But let's step back from that maybe, and maybe I'll open the question for the panel first is, in your context, and I'll do a series of questions, maybe just open it out and we go back to me. What is heritage within hospitality? Is it a physical asset, or is it the shared values and culture of a nation's people? Is there more to it? Why don't I start with you?
It's interesting. I think they're both intrinsically interwoven. It's almost like when you're looking at a physical aspect, the physical asset, you're thinking about, okay, why. It's not necessarily the what it is, it's kind of why it is what it is. And how do you kind of peel off the layers so that you actually reveal what are often very strong cultural issues that driven the physical asset to be as it is. So, for example, if you're looking at, obviously looking at Diriyah Gate and thinking about that as an example, you can look at the physical and you can say, okay, it's mud brick, and that's what's driven a lot of the physical approach. But then you actually kind of layer down into it and you think, okay, what are the cultural issues that have driven it? Okay, there are climatic issues, which have, okay, the massing of the structure then has certain climatic advantages. The proportions of the alleyways between the buildings give shading, and so that, a lot of basic things like that. But then you get into aspects of kind of privacy and kind of cultural issues in relation to privacy. So there's lots of sort of intrinsic issues that really build up to create the physical asset. And I think that's what's really important to understand through the process.
Great. So I think the provenance of a place, its authenticity is clearly non-negotiable. It has to be one of the key components of the context of a hospitality experience.
Yeah, and that's where you have to really delve down into a deeper understanding so that it's not, you're not painting a project on a location, you're weaving it into the fabric of it.
So that leads to another question. So maybe the question towards Imran now, leaning into Diriyah Gate for a minute. So how do you deliver a truly authentic heritage experience, and how do you juxtapose that with the larger legacy operators coming to deliver that? So you have now a Hilton or a Marriott coming in to deliver what is principally a deeply authentic experience. How do you find that balance? I've sort of moved a little bit but I want to continue on this thread, because one of the things is about authenticity, and how do you transfer that to an international operator, say, now do it on my behalf?
No, thank you, Gaurav. First of all, and just to add to the first part of the question that you had, the provenance and the authenticity absolutely given, but I would add one more element personally from Diriyah's perspective, is emotional connection, that authenticity combined with that. And by which I mean is that historically significant part that is undeniably there as a jewel right there. And it is a connection to millions of people, not only in the kingdom, but also wider community in the peninsula, because this is literally the bedrock of where the kingdom was born. So that's really, we are lucky to have that, we're fortunate to have that connection as well, that in addition to those architectural assets, facts, figures, those going back layers of all those vernacular architecture that has evolved, there is an emotional connection. So I would just probably add to that as well. And your question about how are these international brands coming in, how are they going to deliver what they're known for in the setting of that heritage and the cultural aspect. I'll try to keep my answer brief, but we are very fortunate, first of all, to have that leadership, personal involvement from His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, and how passionate himself and His Majesty the King are about Diriyah. And we are very fortunate, I'm very fortunate to be representing that, because this is literally the House of Al Saud's birthplace. It is the birthplace of the kingdom that goes back to 1700s, and the 300-year history is not just the only point of history that we refer to, but also if you go back further into Wadi Hanifa's history, that takes you back 400 AD. Reason why I mentioned that, I just wanted to put it in context of what I'm about to say. So that 400 AD history of Wadi Hanifa, when the first tribe moved there, Abu Hanifa, and then later on when 1727, first Saudi state was formed, and Diriyah was the capital of the first Saudi state in 1727. Now when we are bringing that back to life, we are trying to do justice to that heritage and the culture and the history of the kingdom, of the region, by creating that place to work, live, visit, and entertain and gather. That's literally the largest cultural gathering place that we are developing at the moment. Our work with the international brand, who are known for that soft aspects of that brand promise that they deliver around the world, is to deliver that in the context of that Najdi. And we are not just talking about Arabian culture, we're talking about very specific Najdi architecture, Saudi culture, in the context of that. So we are very lucky to be working with very important partners who guide that architectural process along with the brands, who then bring in their ID, interior decoration, and all the elements into that. And then we guide them in terms of providing that justification. We have got our own heritage and culture department. We've got validation committees. We take it very seriously. So what we do is that we combine those physical aspects, the brand promise, and the context of that history, and we are trying to weave that story. And hopefully when we open our doors in our first hotel, inshallah will open in June next year, when the visitors will come, when the guests will come, they will see that alive and presence in not only just from a historical and architectural perspective, but from a spiritual perspective as well of that journey.
Indeed. Thank you, Imran. And I think that that's a critical aspect of making sure that that fine balance of making sure the authenticity of a place, its provenance, its roots, its cultural legacy, the storied narratives and its role that it plays in the broader context is retained and protected, even though you might have, hard brands or soft brands coming to manage those assets for you. But that leads me to a question for Hicham, because with the boutique group, we know we have a very specific mandate. You have some wonderful palaces. Maybe just decode a little bit about the assets that you currently hold, and how do you activate the palaces piece where you intend to retain the identity with a degree of singularity. So it's more than just the neighborhood. Let's say in Diriyah you have a district in many ways that is, the sum of all the parts is bigger in many ways, right? So, but now with the boutique group, you know, I'm very privileged to have been in a few conversations with both Diriyah and boutique group over the past months and years. I want you to please explain to the audience, what is it that is going to make the boutique group assets different in the context of the heritage, cultural, hospitality landscape in the kingdom?
Absolutely. Thank you, Gaurav. So by way of introduction, boutique is uniquely positioned is at the intersection of heritage and hospitality. Is that better?
Yeah, that's it.
So we sit at the intersection of hospitality and heritage. We are a company wholly owned by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, but we have also strong ties with the Ministry of Culture. Our mandate is to convert royal palaces, historic and cultural palaces, into ultra-luxury boutique hotels. And our mandate is articulated around three main pillars. The first one is to promote and celebrate Saudi culture and heritage. The second one is to provide a Saudi signature hospitality offering. And the third one is to contribute to the economy. So we sit really at the intersection of these two words. How do we deliver that? It has to do with our own operating model. So we are differentiated from, I would say, regional. Is that okay?
Yeah, you just lift it up a little. Thank you. That's good. That's good.
We are quite differentiated from the
That's perfect.
regional and global landscape in the sense that we are an owner and an operator. So this gives us to seamlessly transition from the asset that you described to the soft element and the signature offering. So that gives us a lot of room to have a holistic experience. And we go through a very diligent development process, so everything has to start with the culture and heritage aspect. So we have a diligent cultural and heritage reports that are documenting all the elements of significance, whether it is design features, but most importantly, stories that happen. So stories are the critical element. And from there, we move to how do we translate that into a design principle, restoration principles, and then the operation aspect that is also embedded with the culture and heritage. So we try to infuse cultural touch points throughout the whole guest journey. So we are able to deliver that holistic because we are in full control from the restoration process all the way to the guest interaction and the small touch points throughout the stay.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Hicham. And I think in many ways you have to create a sort of a heritage blueprint within the guest experience, also to make sure that you balance what will be seen either as a living museum or a highly immersive hyper-exclusive experience. So also balancing what is available as access to the public versus what is access to the in-resident guest. Can you talk a little bit about that? How is the experience going to be coded for people who might not necessarily be staying, but how do you create this next layer of engagement, both at a community, non-resident or a resident guest level?
Absolutely. Guest centricity is essential. So we do have a cultural mandate, but we are in the hospitality business. To some extent, we are lucky to arrive late to the party. There has been a lot of examples globally of how to translate heritage into ultra-luxury hospitalities. There are great examples in India, in Morocco, in France, in Italy. So we are using that blueprint that we are adapting with the local Saudi content. We have a strong team that has background from all these prestigious global brands that we are meshing together with the local content. So we are using the blueprint that have worked through the past decades, but infusing it with the local culture.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And Mark, maybe I'm going to lead into and ask you a question. You know, we had this conversation earlier before we came on stage. You know, in a region also where, you know, we are renowned for knocking down buildings after 25 years, and you rebuild, and there's a keen desire to embrace the new. And we know that that comes from whether it's the urban morphology of a city how that is evolving to keep up with the times. We talk about technology, we talk about the urban landscape evolving. In that context, can you maybe, from an architect's perspective as well, give the audience a little bit of an insight on how do you retain and preserve legacy if you also knock things out after 25 years? Because heritage is not necessarily purely the remit of antiquity or, you know, ancient history or palaces for that matter. Maybe could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think going back to your first point is how do we integrate heritage in hospitality? I think that was a key starting point. It may have been 10 minutes ago now, but most of the guys by the side of me have touched on that along the way. I think, you know, we look at UNESCO, who are the international body for safeguarding heritage, and they split the category into two, which is tangible and intangible. The tangible being heritage aspects that we find around, whether it be archaeological remains, old forts, old palaces, objects, etc. But the intangible being the human treasures that we carry within us. And depending on where you are in the world, one can be greater in a civilization than the other. So even in the modern heritage aspect, you know, we can look at the buildings that we have, which are maybe only from sort of 30 years ago, and then use those buildings to look even further back into an intangible heritage that exists within that particular area. One of the things that we've always looked at in Abu Dhabi is the modern heritage movement, and we like to look at the city of Abu Dhabi and be able to read it in a way like an archaeological dig. You can read the stratigraphy of the city, you know, from its kind of 1700s origins, from its watchtowers and its forts, but then through into the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and where we are today, and read every era of the city's evolution, which I think gives visitors an understanding of a city's origins, a sense of place and a sense of the people, and it enables people to engage with a culture. You can use those assets then to go and see the intangible heritage in the kind of the Ayala, the Gawa, the Teli, the Sadu. All of these traditions can then be appreciated, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a new building. It can be a nice juxtaposition of an older building with modern insertions inside it, which are readily identifiable as being modern and allow the past to be preserved for future generations to appreciate.
Wonderful. And I think to that effect, there is also, you know, if we were to call it out, I think in many ways, one of the things that we need to do to embrace innovation in the context of heritage and culture is also be able to have a broader dialogue with the municipalities or the development code on how do you repurpose assets. You know, I was talking to you earlier about recently I was in Florence and I was staying, you know, in the heart of Florence in what is fundamentally was an old bank, and the bank had been repurposed to become a hotel, and that was part of the heritage landscape of that particular area. Now, how do we also, are you having dialogues within Abu Dhabi and elsewhere with regards to repurposing assets to retain that modern heritage, allowing operators to come in and repurpose an asset? Because a large number of the times we are so siloed in our thinking, because I personally think the real estate development code is broken. You know, whether, you know, the words like commercial, residential, mixed use, or hospitality are yesterday's words. Tomorrow maybe needs to embrace a completely different asset class. So how do you, maybe Mark, I'm going to continue with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we are continually looking to safeguard our modern heritage buildings, you know, whether they be repurposed for hospitality or another. And it all depends on, you know, the fit for purpose analysis of the building. We undertake a very rigorous conservation management plan which will assess the significance and value, and I mean heritage value of the building, and then we determine, you know, what would be the appropriate reuse for it. You know, in some instances, maybe a hospitality reuse is not an appropriate use because it may change the physical and interior appearance of the building. But if it can do that, then obviously, you know, that would be of value in two ways. One, it serves a new function and it brings in an economic gain, and also it saves that building, and from a sustainability point of view, it gives it an enduring new use. So yes, that is something that we're looking at, and not only then the building itself, but how that building then engages with its urban context as well, and the city. Like you mentioned to me before, you know, the hotel that you stayed in Florence, it wasn't just about the building being a bank, but it was in the setting it was in as well, and the significance of being on a square and the stately nature of that square, etc. So in a way, you know, it's not just travel to a destination, but it's traveling in time through the experience as well, which is something that is quite enriching to certain visitors.
Yeah, and there's something quite beautiful about the romance and nostalgia of storied places. Right? Fundamentally, there's something quite beautiful which hankers to your, emotional spectrum. Imran, maybe I'll point something to you here. So for me, hospitality is the journey from one heart to another heart. That fundamentally is what, is the human context. Tell me how within Diriyah do we activate and ignite that journey from one heart to another heart? And what is it from a cultural component that we will be excited to see being decoded and brought to life, within Diriyah Gate's development?
Thank you, Gaurav. So in addition to what we've been blessed with already, which we touched on earlier, so at the risk of not repeating that, the architectural marvel, the whole historic relevance, and the sheer fortunate position that we find ourselves having those kind of assets, and the history, the stories that they will tell 300 years ago, how those walls of Salwa Palace, the stories must have evolved from there of formation of the kingdom for the first time, and all those journeys that will be told and retold to when people progress from their environment into ours, into experiencing that. But I think one of the critical most aspect is bringing in the true, authentic Saudi talent, Saudi human resource and personnel element into it, and making it the center stage of that storytelling. So it's not just about the walls and, hey, look at the Salwa Palace, look at this Grand Mosque, look at and talk about the Diriyah siege of 1818, and all those kind of elements are there. But I think one of the critical elements that we are building, we're fortunate to be building, is that human capital of Saudi youth, because we're blessed with a nation which is nearly, first of all, a majority of that, nearly 65 to 70%, is quoted in various percentages, is below 35 years of age. And we, within Diriyah, to give you an example, at the moment, as an authority, as the development company, we have nearly over 2,000 people working, for example, of which nearly 85% are Saudi nationals, 85%, of which 37% are Saudi female. So a part of our mandate is not just, it is a given that we are there to protect the UNESCO World Heritage Site, we're there to enhance it, we're there to showcase it, we're there to bring the world over, host them, show them the true hospitality. But I think the most critical element of that heart-to-heart journey will be delivered by, authentically delivered by the local Saudi men and women. And that's one of the critical elements.
I think there's a great richness here, right? Because I've been working in the kingdom. I first went, when I was with Hilton, I launched the first property in 1997 in Jeddah, when we launched the Hilton then, and then I see the differences today. And I think, very proud of the Saudi story in many ways, what we witness right now, working closely with the leadership and some of the projects, as well as the Ministry of Culture. What I think the region does enjoy is what I call the demographic dividend. We have the youth really empowered, motivated, proud to try and take and be the torchbearers of the cultural aspects of what we need to take further. I think as we lean into this, maybe I'll point a question to Tim now, is what are the mistakes one can make in this? Like, what do we can talk about how great things are and how successful we can be in the context of delivering, a fairly unadulterated narrative around strategy and experience and design. Are there potholes we can avoid? Are there mistakes that we can avoid? What would they be? And what can we impart as sort of insights to our audience also to give them a little bit of the nuances of where people can potentially derail the narrative from authenticity to potentially what might be seen as too commercial?
I think one of the things that we really focus on in the early design stages is really, well, it's kind of pre-design, which is the real evaluation of all of the kind of baseline criteria, which we'll talk about physical issues, but we'll also talk about aspects of culture, community, and history, and how you weave that into the baseline story for the project. So this is, for us, there's a significant investment that goes into that process before we even start designing. And that baseline story then becomes a reference document that can be used throughout the whole process. So it moves beyond, because it's a reference document that's used through all the stages of design, but then it moves into the operations and gets reinterpreted into the operations. And the critical thing is looking at that baseline story and really validating the authenticity. So it's not pastiche, it's something which is taken to the heart. You involve all the stakeholders, you involve the community, you think about how the community is going to be involved after, in the operational stage, so that it's something that really does get woven into the fabric of the community. So I think that is a critical part of the whole process. Challenges are, I guess one of the challenges is pastiche, is producing something which is decorated appropriately, but not really part of the fabric.
Sure.
Other issues are cost. I mean, a lot of the buildings, if we're working with refurbishment or repositioning existing buildings, invariably there's a significant cost, unappreciated cost.
And I think it's a pity one of the panelists is not a hotel operator here today, but one of the things I also want to maybe draw on from an asset management perspective, or whether a development perspective. So one of the tensions I feel is the homogenization of the brand standards. Must do the following, 45 square meters, must have this, must have that, window by this, and etc. So you have this sort of, in many ways, the hyper-commoditization. Brand standards have become so, formulaic in many ways. You can rebadge an asset without much difficulty today. Let's call it out for what it is. And at the same time, when you look at heritage and cultural assets which are so superlative in their nature, they're non-replicable. How do you balance those two components of standardization and brand delivery versus the uniqueness of an asset? Can you maybe, Imran, start with that?
We're having some exciting conversations with various, we've got right from celebrity designers such as Giorgio Armani designing a hotel as an Armani hotel, to Four Seasons, to a Ritz-Carlton, to a Capella, to a Six Senses, Aman, and Oberoi, and Taj, and all our partners that we're working with. I think interesting conversations are, they understand and they've come on board understanding what is that story baseline that Tim referred to, and they've bought into it. So it's really amazing to see people like Giorgio Armani working and understanding that Najdi architecture and trying to pay homage to that interior space-wise. And yes, 45 square meter, 50 square meter, 60 square meter, those guidelines are there. But what we have encouraged them to do more, we do a brand immersion. Imagine operators doing a brand immersion. You understand that. We've gone through that process before. But Diriyah does brand immersion of brand Diriyah, because we believe that is the starting point. And so that's one of the elements that I can contribute without hogging the limelight too much.
Hicham, what are your thoughts on the same?
I think we have a different take on it because we own and we operate. So we are building our own operation aspect. At the origin of all brands is one place. Examples are limitless. You look at the Waldorf, you look at the Raffles. So at the origin of every brand, there is one place. Our approach is to give a lot of respect and try to convey the story of a place first. So as much as we are a brand and we have an overarching principles, we look at every palace separately. So the way you will be greeted in our Al-Hamra Palace in Jeddah will be different from the way you will be greeted in the Red Palace in Riyadh. So it's really capturing the core of the place from a design perspective, but also from a storytelling, and it goes all the detail of the dialects and the communication protocol and the service. So this is where we fit probably a bit different from large-scale brands, that they have their own strengths.
It also gives you a lot more autonomy in many ways to be able to, within the singularity of the palaces, as an owner-operator, to be able to deliver on that. Listen, this is a great topic, and we can continue talking for the next 15 minutes, but I can see our time is up, and I'd like to thank the panelists for their viewpoints and their insights. I think the story around the preservation, the progress, and the protection of the cultural and heritage landscape, I think plays a critical role. I'm very proud of the work that is happening in the kingdom also with the participation that we are doing, and I can witness that change happening because we are in these conversations, in different boardrooms. And I think in this context, to conclude, I think the human narrative is something that we need to really, abide by. I think this idea of a journey from one heart to another, understanding the intangibles and the tangibles, trying to decode a conversation which is bigger than just, classical heritage to modern heritage, saying how do we preserve assets? Like I'm, doing work in the Jacks district in Riyadh right now. We are trying to preserve the industrial warehouses to try and see how you can inject hospitality within that. So there are so many wonderful things on those lines, and obviously it's a great privilege to have you all on the panel today. Thank you very much, the audience, for listening. I hope you took away something meaningful from the conversations too. Thank you. Thank you, round of applause. Thank you.